Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Human Stories, we retell those moments, honest every day, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. I showed up late enough to miss the vows, early enough to hear the truth. Cedar Ridge Lodge was strung with cafe lights and confidence, the sort of moneyed rustic where the bar serves small batch bourbon in cut crystal, and the florist is on a first-name basis with half the county board. Through the open veranda doors, I could see a string trio tucked beneath a timber beam, sawing out a standard that made the room hum like a beehive. I stayed in the pocket of shadow by the service corridor, a place for bus tubs and second thoughts. At the head table, my daughter Madison Pierce to her firm, Maddie to everyone who needed her, held a flute of champagne like it came with a license. Her dress was sleek, clean-lined, made to photograph in 1,000 angles. Aaron, my new son-in-law, had the kind of smile that looks honest even when it's tired. The maid of honor wrapped up something about the grind of law school and the magic of friendship. The crowd chuckled in the exact same rhythm a well-trained laugh. Then Maddie took the mic. "We kept it intimate," she said, eyes glittering under the Edison bulbs. "Immediate family and the people who've actually been there. A laugh lighter than air. Honestly, it's a blessing the list stayed tight." It was the kind of sentence that sounds generous unless you're the person it erases. No one noticed me shift my weight and step backward. A server brushed by with a tray of oysters and apologies. I caught neither. Outside, the night smelled like pine pitch and spilled Prosecco. Gravel answered to my heels all the way to the car. I sat there with my hands on the wheel and the lodge framed in the windshield, a diorama of other people's joy. A cane-back chair scraped inside the ballroom. A cheer went up. My rearview mirror caught my face the way a mirror in a department store fitting room does, too honest for comfort. I drove the county road home with talk radio turned low, then off. The dark past the headlights was February thin, a kind of black that makes you take inventory. Maple Falls rolled by in silhouettes, the grain elevator, the brick library, a diner that still pretended midnight belonged to truckers. In my kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator felt louder than the trio ever had. I took off my heels, lined them neatly on the mat, and set my clutch on the counter like a thing that could go off. On the top shelf of the hutch sat a walnut music box, the lid inlaid with a small brass V. Victor Carver had been a man who liked walnut frames desks, little boxes with hidden cedar at the bottom, so your keepsakes never soured. Widowed women collect dust or paper. I chose paper. Still, the box had stayed closed. His one rule about it had been simple. Open if you need it, Eve, not because you miss me. Ooh. I wound the key, one half-turn. The first 12 notes found the kitchen imperfect and steady, a tune we'd danced to barefoot once on the screened porch while a summer storm did its best against the roof. The music settled my hands, if not my head. I left the lid shut. There was a stack of mail under the calendar flyers, a sympathy card that arrived late by 3 years, and a white envelope from the bank addressed to me in type that understood the weight of its message. I'd already heard the voicemail, the one from a cheerful person in client care following up on recent authorization updates. I had not updated any authorizations. The envelope echoed that cheer in writing. Would I kindly call regarding a question on a limited power of attorney? Would I confirm the best number to reach me? People in compliance are trained to sound like everything is fine until it isn't. I brewed coffee strong enough to hold a spoon and pulled Victor's plastic bins down from the pantry. He had labeled them the way Midwestern men label their tackle boxes, even unshowy print on masking tape. Retirement insurance house files estate. I spread folders across the oak table the way paramedics spread tools at the back of a rig. Paper never lies. It simply waits for someone with time. There was the original will, uncomplicated, lawyered but human. There were codicils I recognized, and one I did not date at a month I remembered for the sound of hospital monitors and the smell of saline. The notary stamp was clean. The witness signature belonged to a woman whose name I'd seen on a holiday card, a junior associate from Maddie's floor. The language wasn't sloppy. It was precise the way a lockpick kit is precise. I made a second stack bank statements, investment summaries, stray letters from annuity companies. We had paid for the house twice over with caution and casseroles. There shouldn't have been much to rearrange. But here were transfers out-labeled with abbreviations that required a ledger I didn't own. Here was a cashier's check that had cleared the week of Victor's biopsy. Here, a payment-marked venue reservation to a line item I didn't remember approving, dressed in corporate initials that made it sound like a rental of folding chairs. I reached for our calendars. Victor had been a meticulous man, but illness makes even meticulous men grateful for help. And Maddie had been ready with her pen. I paged through the spring we lived by appointment oncology imaging call with claims review benefits. On 3 of those days I remembered for the way coffee cooled in my hand, while I waited for discharge, new forms bore my name in ballpoint ink that did not belong to my pen. The signature looped tight where mine has always swung long. The phone on the wall still had a coiled cord. I held it without dialing. It is a particular feeling standing in your own kitchen and realizing you might be the only witness willing to testify on your behalf. I wrote a list instead because lists don't shake. Call the bank, pull copies of anything marked update, find the original limited POA we signed when Victor's knees were worse than his pride. Beside that, I added Dr. Henderson asked plainly, "Did anyone flag my memory?" I underlined plainly. Midwestern women apologize for things like weather and squeaky doors. I crossed out the instinct and wrote the number. On the far edge of the table past the tidy stacks sat an envelope addressed to my old apartment, forwarded twice before it found me. Pierce Brooks' wedding. The calligraphy announced as if paper could smooth the edges of the past. The postmark was 6 weeks late for good manners. I turned it over, read the RSVP deadline we'd already sailed past, and set it face down. The refrigerator kicked on again, a steady mechanical heart. I took the music box from the hutch and set it near the lamp, where the brass initial caught the light. Then I clicked the pen, squared the piles until they made right angles that would have satisfied Victor, and reached for a magnifying glass I hadn't used since we replaced the washer last winter. The dates lined up too neatly. The stamp from the county clerk sat where it should, but the handwriting under it had the tidy impatience of someone who has signed other people's names for a living. I sharpened a pencil. Some nights are for sleep. This one was for reading what was already written. Morning came thin and gray, the kind that makes a kitchen feel too honest. I made toast I didn't want and stood at the sink with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to a cheerful recording promised shorter hold times than ever. The bank picked up on the 9th ring. "This is Carla with Client Care," a bright voice said. "I'm following up about a limited power of attorney on your accounts." "I'm following up about it too," I said, "since I didn't sign one." A pause, the sound of keys, the neutral tone of people trained to walk a middle line. "I can confirm a change request was logged in April of last year," she said. "Executed electronically notarized, then reaffirmed in person at our downtown branch. We'll need to verify your signature on file." "Please do. Would you like me to open a review?" "Yes, and I'll be in today for copies." She offered me a reference number that sounded like a license plate and thanked me for my patience as if I had any to spare. When we hung up, I called Dr. Gail Henderson's office. Gail is the sort of physician who asks how your sisters are doing and remembers you bake pies for church auctions. She answered herself between rounds. "Evelyn," she said, "how are you sleeping?" "Well enough," I lied. "Gail, I need a straight answer. Has anyone ever raised a concern to you about my memory decision-making competency?" "Any of it." Silence, a paper rustle. "No," she said. "Your chart is clean on that front. Who's saying otherwise?" "Not a who," I said. "A paper trail." "I can write a statement reflecting your baseline and our last evaluations." "Please do." I set the receiver back and watched two blue jays argue in the maple. It's strange how quickly a life can pivot on a word like authorize. Victor used to say money is a language. If you don't speak it, someone will speak it for you. By mid-morning, I'd put on a coat that could pass for confidence and driven to the bank. The downtown branch had a lobby done up like a boutique hotel, stone tile high ceilings, tasteful art that made you feel thrifty for appreciating it. A manager named Reed met me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We'll print what we can," he said, leading me to a glass-walled office. "Regulations require redactions." "I understand regulations," I said, settling into the chair. "I used to file them." He slid a packet across the desk, copies of the limited POA, a notary page with a raised seal, a witness signature in tidy student's hand. The notary was a woman I didn't know. The witness, though, K.R. Loring, worked 2 floors below Maddie at the firm. The execution date was a Monday we had spent at the imaging center. "Do you recall being here that day?" Reed asked gently. "I recall being in a fluorescent room arguing with a coffee machine." He nodded, sympathetic without taking a side. "I'll flag this to compliance with your reference number." On the way out, I recognized the security guard from church potlucks. He tipped his cap, and I felt something like steadiness take root. I drove 2 blocks, parked in front of a tire shop with a faded sign, and climbed the stairs to an office above it, where a bell announced me with an old-fashioned ring. "Sandoval Investigations," the frosted glass said. Leo Sandoval looked like a man who spent his days listening, lean, late 50s, dark hair gone pewter at the temple's eyes that didn't blink at the ugly parts. He gestured me in with a hand that had taken notes in worse rooms than mine. "What have you got, Miss Carver?" "Eve," I said, laying the banker's packet on his desk. "And I've got paper." He read in silence, tracing the POA with a finger glancing at the notary seal, the witness line, the date. He flipped to the account summaries I'd printed last night, marked in pencil with questions instead of conclusions. "You were an executive secretary, right?" he said, almost smiling. 30 years, I said. "If paper can sing, I've heard it." "Well," he said, "this chorus is off-key." He tapped the POA. The language is clean, but conditional kicks in upon a physician's letter of incapacity. Those letters don't exist, you said. They don't. Then any use before that is a problem. These transfers see the roading. He slid a yellow pad toward me and drew boxes and arrows, the kindergarten of financial crime. Funds leave checking stop in a sweep account that exists for about 2 days, then split. A portion goes to an account number that looks like a vendor LLC with 3 initials, but doesn't correspond to your property taxes or known bills. Another portion lands in a law firm trust environment, looks like escrow could be temporary parking. There's also a cashier's check that reads like a deposit to an event venue. Cedar Ridge, I said. Could be, he said. The memo line's vague on purpose. He didn't say Maddie. He didn't have to. He kept his tone practical, like a good mechanic explaining why your brake pads were never going to save you at highway speed. What do you want from me? He asked. A timeline, I said. Copies of anything filed with the county that uses my name. A look at who notarized what and where. If you can tie accounts to corporate registrations, do that too. You got it. He pulled open a drawer and set a small digital recorder on the desk the size of a stick of gum. One more thing. If you meet with your daughter, keep this in your purse switched on. In this state, you can lawfully record your own conversations. No need to announce it. My daughter is a lawyer, I said. So am I, he said mildly. Technically. We'll mind the lines. I tucked the device in my bag like a talisman. His office smelled faintly of rubber from the shop below, and for reasons I couldn't name, I found it comforting. Real work happened here. Across town, appearances were curated. Above the tire shop, you got bolts and facts. When I got home, the answering machine held a message from a voice that made nice for a living. Mom, it's Maddie, she said, breezy as a weather report. I hate that you couldn't make it Saturday. Aaron and I would love to take you to lunch and clear the air. Thursday, 1 p.m., Linden and Slate. Linden and Slate sits on the top floor of the Hartwell Hotel with a view of the river and prices calibrated to match. I stood with the phone in my hand and the music box glinting from the hutch as if it had an opinion. I said yes. The next 2 days, I worked the house like a file room. I made a binder tabbed sections for banking healthcare legal property, post-its like a highway system, dates written in block letters. I found the older limited POA Victor and I had signed the year he tore a meniscus, a narrow instrument assigning him authority if I broke a hip and couldn't argue with a surgeon. This newer document wasn't that. I slid both into sheet protectors side by side so the differences couldn't pretend to be cousins. Gail faxed over her letter, no concerns about cognition executive function intact. She signed in blue ink the way old school doctors do when they want a page to feel like it happened in a room with a person in it. I added it to the binder. I took photos of each questionable page with my phone, sent them to my own email, printed a second set, and hid it in the freezer under the peas, because that's a habit you pick up from a mother who survived 3 tornado warnings and a divorce. Wednesday night, I ironed a dress and put my wedding band back on out of habit, then took it off again and dropped it in the velvet tray by the sink. I wound the music box one turn and let the tune wander the hall while I set my purse by the door and checked the recorder's battery. The house was neat enough to satisfy a building inspector. I slept in pieces. Thursday broke clear. I parked 2 blocks from the hotel and walked past a florist doing the day's first buckets. The lobby smelled like lemon oil and ambition. Linden and Slate had walls of glass and servers who poured water like they were conducting a small ceremony. A host led me to a corner table where the light was good for photographs. Aaron stood when he saw me, warm-eyed and earnest, a decent man who held sincerity like a door for strangers. He hugged me, careful with my shoulders. "You look great, Dorothy," he said. "Thank you," I said, and meant it because kindness counts even when you suspect its source is being used for cover. Maddie arrived with the weather of a person who has never rushed for anyone else's clock. Navy suit hair smoothed like a promise, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. She kissed my cheek the way you kiss television hosts. We ordered, exchanged the small talk civilized people exchange while they build a bridge to something heavier. The room hummed with the unobtrusive money of business lunches. When the salads were set down, she placed the portfolio on the table and unzipped it, sliding a manila folder toward the center like a chess player moving a piece to a square she'd marked in pencil weeks ago. I rested my hand on my napkin, found the recorder in my purse by touch, and folded the linen into my lap. The water in my glass caught the light, steady as a level. Maddie rested her fingertips on the folder like it was a Bible and she meant to swear me in. "Mom," she said, voice soft enough to pass for care, "I'm worried." Aaron's smile dimmed. The river threw white squares of light across the table. The server retreated a step, reading the weather. "What about," I asked, folding my napkin once more than necessary. "About how much you've been juggling since Dad died," she said. "We all have limits. It's normal." She slid the folder open. A stack of statements and summaries looked up at me with the polite blankness of paper that has done its part. "There are gaps," she said lightly. Unreconciled charges, accounts you've missed, some transfers I'm sure you don't recall authorizing. Show me the part I'm supposed to forget, I said. She lifted a page with a manicured fingertip. Here she said you moved funds out of your investment account to checking, then out again 2 days later. That kind of ping-pong is concerning. It can suggest confusion. Or a sweep account, I said. Banks do that. Not like this, she said, and the gentleness thinned. And here your property tax installment posted late. Your homeowner's insurer flagged a lapse in automatic payment. That lapse began the same week I called the company to say my husband had died, I said. A real person reset the auto pay. They sent condolences and a new policy schedule. It's in my binder. Maddie didn't look at Aaron, not exactly. She let him look at her. I'm not saying this to upset you, she said. It's just that I've been speaking with colleagues who work in elder law. Names, I said. She blinked as if a bright light had been switched on. Pardon? Who give me names? That's not the point, she said, recovering. The point is a pattern. Forgetting conversations, paying bills twice, not paying others at all. We want to get you help. Independent living communities in Maple Falls are lovely. They take the pressure off. And if you'll sign this, she slid a single-page form forward, I can consolidate your financial management so you don't have to worry. I didn't touch the page. The recorder in my purse warmed against my thigh, a silent heart. You graduated top of your class, I said. You know exactly what the language consolidate your financial management does if a court later decides I'm incompetent. It protects you, she said. From whom? From mistakes, she said quickly. Mom denial is common. Nobody's calling you sick. We're trying to keep little things from turning into big ones. Aaron cleared his throat, the sound of a man who has learned the hard way. There is no right time for certain sentences. Dorothy, he said, careful. I looked over some of the statements too. The venue deposit came through from an account with your name on it. That surprised me. It surprised me too, I said, along with the timing. Maddie kept her eyes on me. Do you remember signing a limited power of attorney last spring, she asked. It only activates with a physician's letter. It's standard. Then you won't mind telling me which physician wrote the letter I said, since Dr. Henderson has already provided one that says otherwise. That landed. It landed like ice in a glass, quiet and large. For a breath, she let the face she wears in court slide into place, flat, competent, not here for anyone's feelings. Then she smiled again, too bright. We can do this the easy way, she said, or with attorneys. I'd prefer the easy way. Aaron would too. Aaron looked at me, not at her. He reached across the table, palm up, an offering. We want you safe, he said. He meant it. I could hear it in the way his voice held itself still. I am, I said. We ate a little and pretended to be people who talk about menus. When the check came, I put my card down before Aaron's hand found his pocket. Maddie slid the folder back into her portfolio with the finality of a lid on Tupperware. Outside, the air had a new edge. Clouds were climbing the western sky from the plains. I walked the block to my car with the bind of my heels steady on the pavement, sat with my hands at 10 and 2, and breathed until the sharpness in my chest backed off a few inches. The recorder's little red light winked when I switched it off. I drove home past the tire shop and the diner and the grain elevator. The town assembled in the window like a model you could buy at a farm supply store if you had patience and a good eye. In my kitchen, I set my purse on the counter and the portfolio of copies beside it. The walnut music box felt heavier than an object its size should. Victor's initial caught the lamp's circle like a coin underwater. I wound the key, lifted the lid, and let the melody knit the room into something that held. The box wasn't deep, but Victor had built a false bottom, cedar thin as a thumbnail. I knew how to find the seam. It gave with a soft click. Inside, a letter on his old stationery from the plant, a small thumb drive wrapped in tissue, and a ledger in his handwriting column neat. Eve. The letter began, no flourish, just his voice in ink. He explained what he had seen when he still had strength for numbers at the kitchen table, a case settlement posted late to a client, funds that floated too long in a trust account, transfers that looked like white-collar housekeeping until you traced their shadows against the calendar. He had asked a friend who used to run compliance for a mid-sized bank to look. The friend told him what he didn't want to hear. He had written down account numbers and dates while he could still trust his hand. If this box is open, he wrote, then I didn't get to finish. I'm sorry I'm leaving you with work I meant to do myself. Be careful. Use the thumb drive for Aaron. I set the letter down and let the music play 2 more phrases before the spring ran out. I called Aaron. Can you stop by? I asked. He didn't ask why. He said he could. 30 minutes later, he stood in my doorway holding a pie from the diner like a man who had misread what would help. I let him in and set the pie on the counter, and we moved to the table the way people do when the thing they're about to discuss requires wood under their palms. I plugged the drive into my laptop. The video opened to Victor at the old roll-top desk, thinner, yes, but steady in the way that made my throat pinch. He spoke the way he had read bedtime stories, clear eyes on the camera, No drama in the voice because the facts were drama enough. He laid out dates and amounts. He described the way settlement funds are supposed to be handled and the way they had been handled instead. He used we where other men would use I because that's who he was. He said Aaron's name near the end, not like an accusation but like a fence post you set deep so the line doesn't wander. Aaron watched with both hands flat on the table, as if bracing for a turn he could not lean into. When the screen went dark, he stayed that way for several seconds. Then he rubbed his eyes and let out air through his nose in a sound that was not a laugh and not a sob. How much, he asked. I don't know yet, I said. Enough to move the needle. He nodded and looked out the window to where Miss Pacheco from across the street was unloading grocery bags from her trunk. He'd fixed her gutter 2 summers ago while Victor held the ladder. She caught my eye and waved. A minute later, she knocked on the back door with a Tupperware of brownies and a neighbor's casual check-in. Evelyn, I baked too much, she said. Help me pretend that was on purpose. Come in, I said. She stepped into my kitchen and looked around the way women do when they measure another woman's days. Countertops sink the tiles you haven't gotten around to regrouting. Her gaze landed on the binder and the neat stacks. You're organized as ever, she said. Thank God someone in this neighborhood is. Sit a minute, I said. We did. We talked about the weather and the pothole at the Bend and the high school band's trip to state. She told a story about her granddaughter's science fair volcano. I listened and answered in complete sentences and saw in her face the thing I needed to see: acknowledgement that my lights were on and no one was home, only in the polite way Midwesterners say it when they mean the opposite. When she left, she squeezed my elbow. You call if you need me, she said. Anything. The big things and the too embarrassed to ask things. I will, I said, and meant it. Aaron stood at the sink with his back to me, looking out at the maple where the Jays had resumed their jurisdictional dispute. She told me the house ought to be in my name, he said, almost to the glass. Said it streamlined the mortgage insurance and protected us both from liability. I believed her. Of course you did, I said. He turned. Dorothy, I'm sorry you were at that restaurant table without me. You were there, I said. You just didn't know what you were looking at. He nodded once. Do you want me to call her? No, I said, not now. He stayed an hour. We drank coffee and ate Miss Pacheco's brownies because sugar was something we could succeed at. Before he left, he took a photo of Victor's letter with his phone, then asked if he could hug me without feeling like he was doing it for show. I said yes. It felt like a grandson hugging you at a church funeral, awkward and earnest and necessary. After he went, I called Gail back and scheduled a formal cognitive workup, not because I needed reassurance, but because paper recognizes paper. Gail gave me a morning appointment and told me to bring my list of current medications and a snack in case the testing ran long. I wrote the appointment in block letters on a sticky note and put it on the fridge where I put the good coupons. Before bed, I sat with the binder and checked my online banking. The layout hadn't changed in 10 years. The numbers had. Under checking, a yellow bar blinked in the corner. Restricted contact branch. Savings wore the same flag like a matching set. A new message box popped up with cheerful font. We've temporarily limited access to certain features of your account while we review changes requested by an authorized party. Please visit your local branch with identification to expedite resolution. I read it twice because the first time I was too calm and the second time I was not. The house was quiet, except for the refrigerator steady as an old friend. I closed the laptop, set the binder back in its place, and wound the music box 1/2 turn. The tune found the hallway simple and exact. I let it play to the end. By morning, the yellow restricted banner on my accounts hadn't budged. The branch manager on the phone spoke like a man balancing a tray of glasses. Ms. Carver, the flag was placed after a family member submitted documentation expressing concerns. Until we complete a review, certain features remain limited. I have a physician's letter, I said. You'll have it in 10 minutes. Bring ID, he said. Compliance will want to scan originals. I laid Gail's statement on the counter by the door with my license and binder, then heard a knock that didn't belong to neighbors. Through the glass, a woman in a navy field jacket with a laminated badge and a tote bag the size of a week's groceries. Ms. Carver, Janet Morrison, with Adult Protective Services. Her voice was practical, not prim. We received a report of possible self-neglect and financial confusion. May I come in? I stepped back and let the door swing wide. If you see a house falling apart, I said, tell me where first. She glanced around with the quick eye of a nurse. Sink-empty counters, wiped pill organizer on the fridge, with days clicked forward. We sat at the table and she opened a notebook with pen already uncapped. Tell me about your week, she said. I balanced my checkbook by hand, I said. Then my bank decided my handwriting was a threat. She smiled without committing to it. Who helps you with finances? I do. I did when my husband was alive. I have a doctor's letter here that might shorten your afternoon. I slid Gail's page across. She read, nodded, tucked it in a plastic sleeve. Any recent arguments with family members about money? Disagreements, I said. Documented. I lifted the binder lid, showed her the tabbed sections, the POA language, the execution dates that refused to pretend they were innocent. I didn't editorialize. She traced a notary seal with her finger the way a person reads Braille. "Do you feel safe?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "when I'm allowed to touch my own savings." She made a note. "I'm required to complete an assessment," she said, "but this report doesn't match what I'm seeing. I'll file accordingly." At the door, she paused. "If anyone calls claiming we're removing you for your safety without a court order, tell them Janet says that isn't how this agency works." I drove to the bank and handed Reed the letter. He photocopied with the solemnity of a wedding license clerk and promised to expedite. On the way out, the security guard from church tipped his cap again, and the small kindness steadied something in my ribs. Leo's office above the tire shop smelled like rubber and coffee. He set down a cardboard tray, 2 cups, and a paper bag before I'd sat. "Donut," he said. "Glazed solves approximately 10% of the world's problems." "I'll take 5%, I said. APS came. They were sane." "Good." He slid a printout across the desk. "I pulled county filings that touch your name. Not many. But I also ran a check on Maddie's bar docket and public grievances, the kind clients file when settlement money arrives tired. Small pattern, but a pattern. "Speak to me like I fix carburetors," I said. "All right. Trust accounts are supposed to be boring," he said. "Money comes in, it sits, it goes out to the person it belongs to. If it takes the scenic route through other accounts, or if it lingers without a clean reason, auditors get interested. I'm seeing delays, enough of them to interest someone with a badge. Someone like you." He grinned without his eyes. "I don't have a badge, but I know a woman who does." 2 hours later, I sat in a windowless room at the federal building across from Special Agent Renee Porter. Porter wore a suit the color of asphalt and a watch with a face you could read from across a parking lot. Leo leaned against the wall, open legal pad in his hand. "I'm listening," Miss Carver, Porter said. And I believed her. I slid the binder over. She turned pages with the neat economy of a person who has learned how to read while the clock runs loud. I gave her the recording from Linden and Slate, the bank reference number, Gail's letter, the copy of the POA with conditional language that hadn't been honored. She asked tight questions and wrote tight answers. When she finished reading, she tapped a paragraph with her pen. "This is useful," she said. "Trust account irregularities are one thing. Elder abuse statutes are another. Together, they get attention." She looked up. "Do you have any reason to believe your signature or your husband's was forged on any documents?" "Yes," I said. "I have reasons and I have pens." She nodded once, made a note in a box I couldn't see, and asked me to sign a consent for bank records. "You may get calls from our forensic accounting team," she said. "Answer as best you can. If anyone harasses you because you spoke with us, call me directly." She slid a card across name number, a government seal. Outside, the wind had teeth. Leo walked me to the car. "You did well," he said. I read aloud. I said, "That's all." "That's plenty," he said. At home, the red light on my machine blinked. "Dorothy Aaron." The message began, voice thinned by distance. "I hired someone to look at our joint accounts. There's a card I never applied for and a line of credit I don't remember. I'm stopping by tonight." He came with paperwork and the look of a decent man who has found termites behind paint. We spread his statements on the table beside mine and compared notations like autopsy techs. The same hands that had moved my money had tapped his shoulder lighter test run. "Don't apologize to me," I said when he started to. "You didn't make a ledger sing off key." He drank half a glass of water without tasting it and nodded. The next morning, Gail ran me through a cognitive workup in an exam room decorated with a framed print of a lighthouse that had never saved a single boat. She asked me to count backward by sevens, draw intersecting pentagons, remember a list of 5 words after a conversation about baseball. She slid a paper across titled Trail Making Test and watched me connect numbers and letters in the right order like a child's placemat at a chain restaurant. When we finished, she turned her clipboard around. "You scored high," she said. "Executive function solid. Processing speed a hair slower than your last visit, which is what years do to humans. I'll write a report." "Make 2 copies," I said. "Already did," she said, and handed me one fresh from the printer with her signature in blue, the ink still drying at the loop of her H. In the afternoon, Reed called from the bank. "Compliance has lifted the freeze on bill pay," he said. "Full access pending review, but given your documentation, I doubt they'll hold the rest long." "Thank you," I said and meant it. Porter called before dinner. "Miss Carver, we've opened a matter," she said. "I'm coordinating with the state bar. If you have any additional records, old calendars, notes from medical appointments, anything that helps us align dates, that's helpful." "I have calendars," I said, "and a habit of writing in block letters." "Block letters are my love language," she said, and I realized she did in fact have a sense of humor. "One more thing. If you receive contact from your daughter indicating she intends to take control of your finances, save it, preferably in writing." "I save everything," I said. That night I made chicken and rice because the body likes reasonable asks. Ms. Pacheco knocked and returned my Tupperware with 2 slices of cake nested in wax paper. We talked about nothing consequential standing at the doorway, and when she left the kitchen felt less like a room for testifying and more like a room for eating. At 9, my phone lit with a number I didn't recognize. The woman on the line introduced herself as bar counsel. "We're reviewing a grievance against Ms. Pierce filed last year," she said. "We're not at liberty to share details. We'd like to confirm her firm's trust account custodian. Do you have any information about settlement timelines connected to her practice?" "I have dates," I said, "and a pencil." She gave me an email address. I sent scans before the kettle boiled. Leo rang at 7 the next morning. "County recorder confirmed signatures on a batch of documents," he said. "The notary exists, but the timestamp puts her at a different branch office 2 miles away when your form was allegedly signed. That discrepancy alone opens doors. Doors to what I asked. Rooms with filing cabinets," he said. "Porter's people will want to see them." By mid-afternoon, paper had started to move like a weather system. Porter scheduled a formal statement. Bar counsel scheduled interviews. The bank scheduled a sit-down for enhanced customer due diligence that matched their script and my patience in equal measure. Aaron texted a photo of the card he hadn't opened and the line of credit he hadn't asked for. I added copies to the binder. Just before dusk, a white sedan rolled slow past my house, the kind that belongs to people who introduce themselves by last name and agency. 2 figures in windbreakers stepped out and walked the block like neighbors with better shoes. A moment later, a sedan just like it turned the corner toward the street where Maddie and Aaron lived, and another crept along the road that ran past the glass and stone building where her firm had grown old, pretending nothing bad ever happened on floors with views. I wound the music box and set it on the windowsill. The tune found its measure and held it. Outside, maple leaves at the curb shifted like cards being squared for a game everyone in this town knows how to play. At first light, Maple Falls had the hush of a courthouse before the doors open. A sedan idled at the curb, engine low. The knock on my door was firm and spare. Special Agent Renee Porter stood on the porch with 2 agents in windbreakers and a folder that looked like it knew how to introduce itself. "Ms. Carver," she said. "Search warrants are being executed at Ms. Pierce's residence and law office. We'll be collecting bank and medical records with your consent as discussed. Please keep your phone on and remain available." "I'm here," I said. She stepped inside long enough to photocopy my IDs with a portable scanner and to accept a fresh copy of Gail's cognitive report, then was gone, the sedan slipping down the block without noise. From my window, I could see the day take shape. Garbage truck dog walker. The paper boys' toss stitched through with unmarked cars that didn't care who saw them. The answering machine blinked. Aaron's voice came through thin and steady. "They're here," he said. "I'm on the porch. They asked me to wait outside. I'm fine." "Good," I said into a silence that did not answer back. By noon, the bank's restricted banner vanished from my accounts. Reed called to tell me full access was restored and to apologize in a voice that had practiced apologies. He promised a written confirmation for my files, and I told him where to send it. The printer hummed in my kitchen like a serviceable neighbor. Porter called mid-afternoon. Papers shuffled on her end. Her sentences wore the weight of things that had stopped being rumors. At the residence, she said agents recovered forged applications for a credit line in Mr. Brooks's name and a credit card issued to your address. At the office, we seized modified client ledgers and unsigned settlement checks held past distribution dates. We also found a file regarding adult protective services with draft language mirroring the report you received. I wrote without looking at the page. "Anything else you need from me?" "For now," she said. "Answer your phone and save everything. One more item. 2 life insurance policies naming Ms. Pierce as beneficiary, one on you, one on Mr. Brooks. Signatures appear inconsistent with exemplars." The pencil stopped. "Understood." "Miss Carver," she said, voice. "Even you should know we're coordinating with the medical examiner regarding your husband's records. You'll be contacted by a detective about historical treatment notes." I said yes where yes was the only word. By evening, the local station led with a live shot from outside Maddie's firm trucks. Tripods, the young anchor with cold fingers, and the careful diction of a person who has been handed a difficult paragraph. The crawl read, "Attorney under investigation. Trust accounts seized." A spokesperson for the firm stood at a microphone and expressed confidence in the process and sorrow for any inconvenience to clients. A Bar Association press release followed 2 hours later, interim suspension pending disciplinary proceedings. The arraignment happened fast, the way arraignments do when the paperwork is airtight. In a courtroom, the color of old envelopes, the clerk read, counts with numbers that ran longer than their names, wire fraud theft from an older adult identity, deception filing false reports, obstruction. Maddie stood with her lawyer hair pulled back, mouth set. The judge listened to arguments about flight risk and community ties paged through a binder thicker than mine and denied bond. He spoke in the plain register judges use when they've done this long enough to understand the echo. Across the aisle, Aaron sat with his hands folded, face open and raw. He did not look at her. I kept my eyes on the bench and the flag and the seal that has watched over men and women who thought rules were shapes you could pour water around. Days stepped toward weeks, with the deliberate pace of winter turning. Porter's team traced accounts. The state bar interviewed former clients. A forensic accountant mapped money through rooms it shouldn't have visited. The county clerk produced logs that put a notary across town when my POA was allegedly signed. At my kitchen table, Leo diagrammed dates on a legal pad until the boxes and arrows became a shape you didn't need to be taught to read. The medical examiner's office requested Victor's treatment summary and medication lists. Dr. Henderson sent them and called me after. Her voice was careful, professional, and kind at once. "They're doing a full review," she said. "You'll get their findings directly." The findings came in the language these offices prefer: neutral exact. Toxicology flagged cardiac agents inconsistent with the expected profile. Manner of death amended. Charges added in a supplemental filing that took the breath out of the gallery when the clerk read them. The trial calendar shifted to accommodate a case that no longer fit inside one docket. Courtrooms teach patience. I learned benches bailiffs the angle of fluorescent lights at 4 p.m. I learned the faces of jurors who wrote nothing down, and of jurors who wrote everything. I watched as accountants explained paper the way cartographers explain coastline, as a bank compliance officer testified to alerts triggered and overridden, as a notary pointed to her timestamp in the map. I listened to a neighbor from Maddie's block describe a shred bag carried to a car the morning agents arrived. I sat still while Gail read from her report, and while Janet from APS said with no heat that the complaint lodged about me did not match the scene in my kitchen or the person in my chair. Aaron testified once briefly, a careful 10 minutes that laid out what had passed through his accounts and what had not. He folded his hands after and looked at the floor. When he stepped down, he walked with the odd precision of a man measuring distance in inches. Verdicts are spoken on the record, the way promises are spoken in churches. The foreperson stood, the clerk asked, and answers came in a tone people reserve for truth they are required to say out loud. The judge conferred with counsel, removed his glasses, replaced them, and delivered sentence. Attorneys on both sides made notes for future filings. Deputies took their positions. The door at the back of the courtroom opened because that is what doors do when they are called. Restitution paperwork traveled its own route. The Client Protection Fund set figures the firm disgorged fees, assets were seized and assigned, and a restitution schedule snapped into place with the dry click of a well-made clasp. The bank credited back improper charges and flagged my profile with protections that lived under acronyms. Reed called and said a thing that almost sounded like relief. At my house, life resumed in inches. The binder moved from the center of the table to the hutch. Gail's report returned to a file with other papers you hope never to need. Miss Pacheco brought over chicken soup in a jar that still smelled faintly of her spice cabinet. I returned her Tupperware with shortbread. We talked about the high school's spring musical and the pothole the city had finally filled. Aaron came by with a grocery bag and a straightened back. The lines around his eyes had changed. The man was still inside them. He set the bag on the counter, pulled bowls down without asking where they lived, and ladled soup like a person practicing being steady. We ate at the table where the maps had been. After he washed while I dried sleeves, pushed up water, running no rush. When he left, the house held a quiet that was not empty. I took the walnut music box down and set it by the window. The brass fie caught the late light steady and simple. I wound the key and lifted the lid. The tune climbed and turned and came home to itself, imperfect and true. I listened until the spring let go, and the last note settled into the room like a thing returned to where it belongs. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.